Thank you for joining us. I'm going to start kicking us off on today's second session, and the purpose of this session is to really touch about the evolution of the electricity grid into a more dynamic and transformational digital platform. My name is Brian Fellon, Senior Vice President at Expansive for our Power Solutions Division, and it's an honor to be here alongside our panelists, all of whom are industry pioneers as well as leaders in their respective domains. This morning on the panel, we're going to analyze and examine the current state of the modern electric grid. We're also going to talk about how major power market participants are grappling with, of course, AI and data center-driven demand, all amidst the backdrop of clean energy development, battery storage innovation, and real-time market mechanisms that are establishing a robust and also verifiable, well-matched clean power system. Our panel features well-known experts in power market modeling, data analytics, and energy decarbonization for large-scale producers and consumers of electricity. So to begin, please allow me to introduce our speakers. To my left, we have Dr. Gary Doris, who is the CEO and founder of Ascend Analytics, a 170-plus employee energy analytics software and consulting firm. He has over 20 years of experience in innovative energy modeling, supporting real-time operations, portfolio management, and resource planning. Dr. Doris has independently assessed markets for more than $50 billion in project financing and has advised multiple boards. He is frequently sought for expert testimony and executive presentations, including serving as a lead expert witness for Merrill Lynch in the Enron proceedings. Before Ascend, he was CEO of eAcumen, a 60-person energy analytics company. So welcome, Gary. To Gary's left, we have Rajiv Bajaj, Vice President of Sustainability Solutions at Constellation. With over 30 years of experience in diverse, fast-paced business sectors, Raj is a seasoned leader, skilled in developing and executing innovative strategies that drive business transformation and growth. As the Vice President of Sustainability Solutions at Constellation, Raj leads the fastest-growing business segment within the company, engaging with retail companies to help them execute on their decarbonization and overall sustainability goals. Raj is also an active board member and membership committee co-chair of the Clean Energy Buyers Association, where he works with over 400 members, including many Fortune 100 companies, on regulatory, policy, and technological solutions to drive carbon reduction strategies. To the left of Raj is Kyle Harrison, Global Head of Environmental Markets at Bloomberg New Energy Finance. Kyle leads BNEF's Carbon and Environmental Markets team, which publishes content on the private sector's transition to the low-carbon economy. The team focuses on core areas including compliance and voluntary markets, along with weather risk and environmental markets, including renewable energy certificates. So as we kick off here this morning, I'd like to invite each of our panelists to share some of their industry perspectives, briefly introduce themselves, and also give an overview of how their organization is really helping shape the modern electricity grid. So to start, Raj, if you might.
Sure. Good morning. Raj Bajaj, Vice President of Sustainability Solutions. Brian, thank you for the kind introduction. For those of you who don't know Constellation, we're a company that spun off of Exelon about 3 years ago, and we are a publicly listed company on the NASDAQ. There are really 3 different components to our organization. The first is the generation side of the business, where we operate the largest fleet of nuclear power here in the U.S. We have 21 reactors in 12 different locations. We also produce the largest volume of 24/7 carbon clean power in the country. Along with that, we have a retail and wholesale side of the business. I report into the retail part, where we serve over 2 million customers on the mass markets, public sector, as well as the consumer and industrial segment as well. What we try to do is work with 3/4 of the Fortune 100 companies, helping them transition from brown power to clean power, and put different strategies in place because one of the things we're going to touch on today is this is not a cookie cutter model. You just don't have an assembly line where every company is going to do the same thing and end at the same place. So how do you do this in an organized manner to align with their cost and risk strategies to make it in the timelines that they have in place is a challenge and an opportunity, and we work with these companies very closely. One other last point I'll make here is, Constellation recognizes that there's nothing that we can do here that would be all Constellation. This is a partnership. There's a lot of complexity. Every day is a new day in our business. It's not the same boring power business that we were in a few years ago. And we need to collaborate, partner, work with new technology, and really try to understand what is going on with our market so that we can be the leaders and help in defining what happens with our customers and the transition to sustainable solutions moving forward. Glad to be here.
Thanks, Raj. Gary.
Hi, I'm Gary Doris. I'm CEO of Ascend. We're about 170 people, as Brian mentioned, energy analytics shop. We have about 37 PhDs. I guess that makes me nerd in chief. We're extensively involved in both the producer side and the consumer side, helping utilities make long-term resource planning decisions, as well as helping producers, IPPs, determine what to build, where to build, and enabling them to get projects financed. We're supporting about 70% of storage and renewable financings today. We also are involved extensively in portfolio management for utilities and retailers and power producers, as well as operating about 20% of the US storage fleet in the day-ahead real-time market and partnering with Expansive in that area. Where we see things going in our contributions to the field is obviously unlocking value in assets and overcoming some of the limitations of legacy models to make more rational economic decisions to lower the cost of power supply and advance, I'd say, the energy transition.
Fantastic. And rounding us out, Kyle.
Yeah, well, perfect. Thanks, Brian. And thanks to the Expansive team for having me today. I'm also really embarrassed. My resume is like way shorter than your guys, so give me a few more years and we'll get there. And so, Brian, like you mentioned, I lead our environmental markets team at BNEF. That primarily includes our carbon markets coverage, but in a previous role at BNEF, I used to lead our sustainability research, which included our corporate clean energy procurement content. I would love to think that we're shaping the market in the same way that your organizations are, but BNEF is kind of more on the sidelines as a research organization. What I can say is that there's a lot of data in these markets. Some of these markets are very opaque and they're rapidly changing. And what we can hopefully do is provide a little bit more transparency to help various organizations kind of navigate all that uncertainty. So I think that's the exciting role that we bring. And the energy system, which we'll talk more about today, is changing a ton right now. It's a really exciting time to be in power markets, electricity, renewable energy, even carbon markets. And BNEF is kind of an exciting role to kind of provide that content and knowledge for that.
Absolutely, absolutely. So in sticking with that theme, as you can see, we've got some real industry experts. When you think about analysis, data, insights, and really that intelligence that power market participants and even sustainability market participants need, that clearly comes through BNEF. Of course, both Raj and Gary sit more so on the commercial side of the equation and their vested interests for their organizations, but of course, intersecting with the energy transition. But perhaps AI has been a huge part of the conversation in everybody's lives for the past several months. We had a great discussion this morning, breakfast panel, around practical applications of AI. But with that, of course, we're seeing large load growth in data centers and really the gold rush around that. So Kyle, if you could maybe just give us some perspective, how is data center demand expected to grow in the US, globally, based on some recent projections from BNEF?
Yeah, so I mean, maybe taking a step back, right? If you look at, especially in the United States, if you looked at the energy system over the past decade or so, power demand was relatively flat, right? And for the first time now, power demand is expected to rise significantly. And that's not just due to data centers, right? Data centers will play a huge role in this. Our estimates are that they will make up 9% of electricity demand in the United States by 2035. That's up from around 4% today. So there's going to be pretty significant growth there. But you also have fleet electrification, right, from electric vehicles. That's adding a lot more power demand to the grid. You have Bitcoin and cryptocurrency. And at the same time, you also have things like industrialization and the electrification of industrialization. All of that is leading to increased power demand. And again, that's kind of changing the way that we think about the energy system. Previously, right, and when you think about BNEF, our primary focus is around the low carbon transition, right? That's how we've always kind of coined ourselves and our focus areas. But that energy transition is now going to start to look a whole lot different. And if you ask anyone that is a major power consumer in the United States, they're all looking at a above or all of the above approach, right? Whatever can get them power in a reliable manner the fastest, that's what's going to be the most important. It's not necessarily about what's the cleanest anymore. And so historically, right, we always looked at natural gas, for example, as maybe a transition fuel as we move more towards solar and wind. And solar and wind are still going to play an absolutely massive role in this conversation over time. But gas is going to play arguably an even more important role, right? And so our estimate is that gas demand from data centers in the United States is going to rise to 9%, or is going to rise 9% by 2035 relative to today's levels. So it's no longer a transition fuel, right? It's going to be an important part of that equation. And so it's a really, again, a really fascinating time. I'm sure you all saw the news earlier this week, or maybe it was the end of last week, that Meta just got its FERC registration. It's now going to start trading power in wholesale markets. That's something that Amazon, Google, Microsoft, they've been doing for years. And so you have all of a sudden these hyperscalers that are getting way more involved in the market as well, right? And so the kind of big four cloud giants, which are Microsoft, Amazon, Google, and Meta, they make up around 43% of data center capacity today. That's only going to increase over time, right? Amazon has a pipeline of, I think, 12 gigawatts of hyperscalers coming online in the next couple of years in the United States alone. So it's a really, really exciting time.
Yeah, no, that's great. And you know, I'm sorry to laugh out loud, but I remember when Google applied for FERC market-based rate authority, and I feel like it was probably somewhere in the 2010-ish.
It was a long
era.
time ago.
Yeah. Yeah, so I mean, I guess it means like, you know, the business models of some of the hyperscalers and the data center operators have to evolve, right? Their vested interests around energy, but then also decarbonization are evolving all the time, but they're taking a more active role perhaps in participating in these markets. So maybe just a kind of a question to Raj and Gary, you know, what's your view on that? What's your view on, you know, how the roles, strategies, and perhaps business models of utilities, ISOs, IPPs, you know, how are they evolving in the modern era?
Yeah, I mean, Brian, it comes down to the fact that, you know, instead of looking at what we're going to do with our customers over a, let's say, 10 to 20 year period, what the short term becomes more important. What can we do over the next 5 years? Because it's hard to extrapolate with any sense of accuracy into what's going to happen past 2030, let's say. So when you start, and Kyle, you talked a little bit about this. So when you start talking about 2030, from a constellation standpoint with our generation, there are really three things that come to mind. First one is we got to look at the fleet we have right now. The fleet, most of it has been operational for a long time, and we want to make sure that we continue to bring that power and put it on the grid. So how do you extend the life of the units that we already have? Active project, trying to increase the lifespan by 20 years to make sure that that power stays on the grid, because that was the challenge we had a few years ago. We took down Unit 1 at 3 Mile Island because the economics just were not viable. It was a great unit. It was actually our most profitable unit at the time, but unfortunately, we still could not make any money off of it. So extension of life is important. The second is just squeezing the lime or the orange or whatever you want to call it. When you look at our 21 units, how do we extract more power from those units, uprates? So that's a very active part of what we're trying to do. With all the planning that's being implemented, we are hoping that we can put up to 1 gigawatt, 1,000 megawatts of new power on the grid. I mean, that's very substantial. It's about one new reactor coming online when everything is said and done. And it's going to cost us about $800 million to do that. So, you know, the dollars and how do you generate those dollars to continue to grow is another challenge as well. And the third piece is, you know, how do you take some of the shuttered units that are still available to be ramped back and put into the grid. We did a deal with Microsoft where 835 megawatts, the Crane Clean Energy Center, is going to be brought online. So that's volume that no one would have expected a couple of years ago, but now we've actually moved the timeline, and sometime in 2027, we're hoping to bring that power to the grid. Second thing I'll talk about or briefly mention is the fact that, you know, there's a lot of complexity, right? Transmission, for example, is a challenge. So there's work that needs to be done on the regulatory and policy side of things that's in parallel to putting on new volume. The CEBA organization that I'm part of, Clean Energy Buyers Association, is one group that's really trying to bring all the stakeholders together so that instead of Constellation going to DC and lobbying and talking to congressmen and senators about what we want to do, it's a team of people. And I'll use an example. A few months ago, I went with Cargill, Pepsi, and one other company together, and we visited 6 representatives from the House. So if Constellation goes, right, people can say there's a bias here, you're an energy provider, this is in your best interest. But when you go with some very large companies and everyone is saying and talking the same language, people listen. And those are the kind of things that we have to start thinking and doing more.
Absolutely. Yeah, Gary, what's your take?
Well, data centers have an ordered priority. It's timing, environment, cost. And the exigency with which they need to pursue power supply is the real constraint. We are just limited with available power and interconnect. And market prices are screaming for flexible capacity. And that tends to steer things more towards battery storage when it's flexible capacity. Also the timing, they can bring that on sooner. We saw SPP just last week say, look, data centers can enter our system as long as they become flexible, they're willing to shut down. So we're looking at either kind of behind the meter storage or some between the fence or in front of the fence storage. Typically we call this BYOC, bring your own capacity, and you can get a plug. That's going to expedite the timing that's so badly needed. It is good that you were seeing environment is a critical issue. That leaf at the bottom of Google isn't going away. It's just timing is taking precedent at the moment, and they'll backfill obviously with clean supply. But as we look at the future of data centers, we also have to look at the regional dynamics. We're a nation of divided power. East of the Mississippi, it's pretty leafy, and there's not much wind. It's a little, let's say, encumbered by trees to generate solar. West of Mississippi, it's open prairie. If it's least cost supply, I'm glad to see SPPs opening up their doors because that's the center of least cost supply in the country. It's the lowest cost. It's got a lot of wind and a lot of sun and low cost land. Perfect. That's going to be the future, realistically, is areas where the least cost supply is. The natural gravitational pull always should be towards the least cost resource center. And that's what we're going to see. It's a kind of transformation of supply away from Virginia, where data centers started, to now the low-cost centers. Kind of like the Industrial Revolution started where the mills in New England were, because that's where streams were. And then we started moving towards fossil fuels as a system of supply, and that certainly wasn't New England.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, Gary, just maybe sticking with you for a second too, and switching gears a little bit into the role that Ascend Analytics plays in these markets. Obviously, deep insights. You've been into the data science and large language model space for quite some time, and a pioneer, really, of applying those technologies to power market optimization, at the resource level and even long-term projections. But now we've kind of find ourselves in a place where AI is doing different things everywhere. And of course, one of the things that it's doing is perhaps, even ironically, as it's solving problems, it's creating new problems, right? So I guess the question is, do you think that AI models can actually help address that large growing power grid demand, as they're also kind of driving some of that power grid demand?
Yeah, it's a kind of a conundrum. Is this consumption going to be able to be part of the solution? And for sure, more wise decisions are needed. And I'd say advanced modeling is part of that. I think also overcoming some of the limitations of legacy models, which tend to be biased towards more traditional sources of production. While the market prices are screaming for flexibility, in order to maximize the value of that flexibility, you need to have AI. We run 20% of the US storage fleet, and our models using AI have improved 55% over the last year. I think last month we were ranked, they just about 200 batteries, a little more than that in Texas. We had 6 out of the top 10, and we swept the podium. AI is really going to deliver value. When you deliver value, you expedite deployment. And it's key, and it'll definitely be a big part of the solution.
Yeah. Any thoughts or comments from Raj or from Kyle on that?
No, I agree, Kyle.
No, I mean, I think we all provided kind of different perspectives on where the electricity system is going. I mean, I think one kind of consistent thing that we talked about is speed, though, and how transmission, and the grid can sometimes kind of get in the way of that, right? And for example, you have massive transmission expansion projects currently underway in markets like MISO to kind of upgrade that grid, upgrade that infrastructure to basically prepare for all this incoming load. So it's, yeah, very fascinating.
All right, no, that's great. And look, I think we've talked a lot about kind of the macro scale, some of the macro factors, what's in play here. And as the last panel, the first panel this morning talked about, right? There's a multidimensional aspect to everything that we do, whether it's power, clean power, carbon offsets, carbon credits, and then geographically, ton of complexity in the space. But if we maybe drill back down to some of the work that, of course, Raj, you're doing with Constellation, and a lot of the research, Kyle, that you're really working on there too. When we talk about clean energy development and offtake, perhaps it's also time too that we take a little bit of a pulse check on corporate commitments and even market sentiment, right? We're in a different place in 2025 than we were in 2024, and things are moving fast. So Raj, maybe kind of coming back to this concept of RECs, and can you tell me, there seems to be this intensifying effect and really momentum around hourly RECs, power purchase agreements, 24/7 carbon-free energy. What are their similarities, differences, and how do they work together, perhaps for our audience?
This is an area also that's transitioning, right? And there's just an incredible amount of activity going on. A lot of it is being driven by the GHG protocols, and the fact that there's a realization that the protocols that are currently in place do not prevent fossil fuel from being used because of the intermittent nature of some of the clean energy. I mean, unfortunately, the sun isn't shining and the wind isn't blowing all the time. So for that reason, there's been a tremendous effort. A technical group has been put together, and they've spent significant time trying to understand what is it going to take to minimize that fossil fuel and to really help drive more sustainability. And it's very controversial, a lot of passion running on all sides, because if you're a company, you're worried about the fact that I've done all this work, I've tried to do the right thing, and now you're going to change the rules on me, and I'm going to have to rethink everything that I've done so far, and my strategy is going to change, or my costs are going to go up. If you are a big clean energy advocate, you're like, this is the right thing to do, and if we don't do it, it's going to be detrimental to the planet. So you have different sides, and to get to a point where everyone agrees has been a challenge. But luckily, cooler heads have prevailed, and we have gotten to a point where there's a document that has been put together. That document is going to be made public in October for 60 days, and the public is going to get an opportunity to comment. Huge progress. I've been involved on all sides, so I've seen how this is, the effort it's taken to get to this point. Now, there are a few things I want to mention, because there are things that still need to be done, and from a Constellation standpoint, there are 4 different areas that I wanted to highlight that companies are coming in and talking to us about as important sections that they want to make sure are addressed before the final document is published and this gets put into action. So the first is that you should not be doing this for every single company, right? You have to have a certain threshold above which an hourly reporting would make sense, because otherwise it becomes very onerous and hard to implement. So that's the first thing. Second is, if I'm a company and I have done a whole bunch of VPPAs, I may not meet the requirements moving forward, but I should be grandfathered, right? And given the benefit of the doubt that I was doing the right thing and trying to reduce my carbon as much as possible. The third piece is the data piece, right? There are going to be situations where you have data that is not accessible or it's just not available to the company. So what can I do without, again, making my life very, very difficult to do what needs to be done, but do it in a simplistic manner without putting a lot of cost in place. And the fourth is a phase-in period. I mean, these types of things should not be expected to happen overnight. So as a large company, give me some time so I can prepare myself, modify my strategy to get things done. 4 examples of the kind of areas that companies are looking and thinking about. And I would encourage everyone in this room to really look at that document, because there's a lot there, and you really need to understand the nuances of what's going to happen and make sure your input is being provided before that final document goes out. One last thing I'll also try to elaborate on here is that, at Constellation, work has already started in this area. So it's not like companies are sitting doing nothing. One area of fast growth is, we have a product which is a load following VPA called our core product. Companies that are on it are now saying, okay, how can I reduce my carbon by pulling your nuclear power to supplement what we need when the wind isn't blowing or the sun isn't shining? And we've done several of those deals, hyperscalers, but also with other companies, to help to make sure that they can claim that they have 24/7 by 365 clean power.
Impressive, really, what Constellation's doing. I mean, you've always been very active in these markets, both from the wholesale perspective and, of course, the retail perspective. Gives you tremendous exposure to the vested interests of corporates and large C&I clients that you work with. And Kyle, I know you spent a lot of time in this space too. So, when you think about last year, you think about this year and going forward, have any of the strategies at the corporate level changed in terms of clean energy procurement or their strategies going forward?
Yeah, so I think that the hierarchy that was mentioned previously, right, when it comes to data centers, I think that's a really important part of this. So speed, right, is the most important thing. The environmental benefit is really important, and then cost. And in some cases, all of these things complement each other, right? And so if you look at the lead times for building a solar project or a wind project, they're way quicker, right, than, for example, signing a nuclear PPA or building gas plants, right? Gas turbines, the prices are going up significantly. They have substantial lead times. And so while it does make sense from a reliability standpoint, and again, we need an all of the above approach, in a lot of cases, if you need power quickly, the cleanest source might be the best option in that case. And so you've really seen corporations, I think, a lot of those kind of hyperscalers, but a lot of corporations, they're still very much pushing forward with their sustainability goals. And this isn't something new, right? If you look, I remember I think it was like 2018, Meta was going to build a data center, and it was choosing between New Mexico and somewhere else out west. And I think it was Black Hills Energy Corp and PNM were basically both vying for that data center, and they both created green tariff programs to ensure that that data center was built there, right? And so these hyperscalers, these tech companies, they've really always prioritized that clean source. And I think that's still going to be a really important part of the equation. But again, you're going to start to look at kind of base load carbon-free power generation sources as well. Geothermal, right, is not something that was getting a lot of attention a couple of years ago. There's a tremendous amount of untapped potential for geothermal. It's going to play a really important role here. And so I think that while things have changed a little bit, right, there's still a lot of similar conversations happening at the same time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think a lot of those companies that you've mentioned, both Raj and Kyle, they're always innovating too, right? We talk about 24/7 carbon-free energy. A lot of these companies are also the pioneers of those types of mechanisms. Gary, I mean, your firm is also very much involved in this space too, and I know you've done a lot of work around locational marginal emissions. Can you maybe just kind of explain to everybody how that carbon abatement mechanism works, but then also, where do you see demand for those types of solutions going forward?
So fundamentally, what we're trying to do is get as much carbon as we can per dollar spent. And you can reduce carbon at $10 a ton, or you can find very expensive carbon at several $1,000s a ton. Obviously, it makes sense to pursue as much as you can at $10 a ton versus a couple $1,000s a ton. Sometimes if you do 24/7 matching, you might be hitting some couple $1,000 a ton, and maybe in other areas of the country you could get $10 a ton. So our objective is to kind of always climb that marginal cost curve and maximize the low end of that cost curve. And the way to do that is through marginal emissions. I think the best analogy I have for this is like wetlands. So if you build on a wetland, you say you consume an acre, typically you get 2 acres of offset. Same thing with emissions. If you're not going to match your load, hey, a better approach and more effective in terms of improving the climate and say per dollar spent is to reduce 2x that maybe someplace else. because in the end, we're just trying to reduce emissions. And so marginal emissions is this concept of at each location and point in time, what's the marginal emissions reduced? In parts of this country, if it's coal, it's pretty high. And gas is somewhat high, but we have west of Mississippi between 10 and 3 over 6 months of the year, we're curtailing energy regularly, most of the time. And that's 0 marginal emissions. And when you're in California, marginal emissions is very small. So the concept of marginal emissions for, let's say, a battery storage unit is you charge at low marginal emissions and discharge at high. Well, that creates a net reduction in emissions. But yet, under traditional carbon accounting, it's considered a net increase. Well, something's got to change. And we have to evolve more away from RECs, which is good initial scorekeeping, probably towards emissions-based, because that's our objective. And it's a natural evolution to go from RECs to emissions. And marginal emissions is the probably most efficient way to get there. It has some complexities, but folks like Expansive, working with our marginal emissions curves, I think we have a pathway forward to start realizing the economic value a little more efficiently.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I'd say that intersection between Scope 1 and Scope 2 certificates is really starting to merge, right? We're starting to see that intersection and that evolution with a lot of the technology that's behind the work that of course, Gary and his company do, but Raj, yourself. But like I said, the large, hyperscalers and those who are leading the AI revolution, it's very interesting to see how the power markets have really evolved over the past 10, 15 years and where we are today. Whether you call it all the above energy policy or all the above corporate policy, we're really starting to see things transform. We have a few minutes left and then we'll take some questions, but I think if we could kind of finalize final thoughts, starting with Kyle, Raj, and then Gary, but where do you see things going between, let's say, now and 2030, and then how do you think things may play out beyond then, depending on what we see in the next couple of years?
Sure. So, I mean, every power market in the U.S. is quite a bit different, and Gary was kind of talking about different parts of the United States and the unique characteristics they have. So it's tough to kind of paint the whole country with a brush, but maybe I can kind of use ERCOT as a harbinger for some types of policies that could be adopted in other parts of the country. So for example, there's currently legislation in Texas that's requiring any new generation coming onto the grid to have firm generation alongside of it, right? And so what you're going to expect is that any solar or wind that gets built in Texas, it's going to have storage alongside of it. And so going back to Gary's point earlier, storage is going to play a massive role as kind of this Swiss Army knife panacea flexible solution in electricity grids across the United States. I think that's really exciting. Another factor, right, that we're going to start to see emerging in Texas, we've already seen this in California, you could see it in other parts of the world, is the duck curve, right? And so adding all this kind of zero marginal cost solar, flooding the market in the middle of the day, is going to dramatically change what those prices, especially for solar, the realized price or the value that they earn on the market, that's going to change a ton in the coming years. We're already starting to observe that in Texas. The last factor that I would add here is that because you're having things like industrialization and data centers, these new demand sources, they operate 24/7, right? They need reliable power throughout the day. This isn't an office building where peak demand is in the middle of the day. And what we're actually going to expect is that there's going to be this paradigm shift in Texas where off-peak power is actually going to trade at a massive premium to on-peak power in a couple of years. And the biggest winners of that are going to be the technologies that can generate in the shoulder hours of the day. So for example, you might see wind build cut due to the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, but wind is going to be a massive winner in Texas in the long run as a result of this. Batteries could play a massive role in this, nuclear, right? And so it's really going to be this paradigm shift in terms of what technologies benefit the most from this new electricity grid. And so I think those are kind of the biggest things. And then the point that I mentioned earlier, which is around transmission, right? Congestion is going to be a huge challenge in the United States. And there are some really massive grid expansion plans that are in place right now that are tens of billions of dollars to upgrade substations, upgrade transmission lines. All that's going to play a role as well.
Great. Raj?
A couple of things that I'll try to highlight here. One is, when you talk about energy demand and in the media, it's all about how fast, the percentages. Those are all great, but at the end of the day, the question to think about is, do we have a demand or a peak demand issue, right? When I talk about peak demand, there was a white paper published by Duke University's Nicholas Institute in February of this year. It's a great paper. If you have not read it, you should definitely do so. And they talk about a 3% problem, because 3% of the time, it's during the peak demand timeframes, is when the grid is starved and really needs the most help. Otherwise, most of the time, the grid is okay. So we can really go down two strategies here. The first strategy is we build, and we build like crazy. And we really can't do much between now and 2030, but if we could, that would be option one. Option two would be to try to figure out, okay, what is it going to take for us to address this peak demand time frame and do something about it. And one thing that we've been talking to our customers a lot over the last few months has been demand response, because there are programs out there that incentivize to drop load. I was at a heavy industries conference in Pittsburgh last week, where you have steel and cement and some very large producers which use a lot of electricity. So how can you create something where there's an incentive for them to shed that load during peak times? According to the Nicholas Institute paper, if you were to drop load by around 1% or so, approximately, you can put 100 gigawatts worth of power on the grid. So how do you get creative and come up with products that incentivize would be very important. And that's one area that we're putting a lot of focus on right now. The second thing I'm going to mention is the fact that we're talking about all of this because this is a national security and reliability issue, right? We are in a new arms race that Washington has made that very clear, and we need to do everything we're talking about today, but do it in a manner that helps growth, but also does it in a way that financially is feasible for the country and mitigates the risk as much as possible. That sounds really easy, but it's a very difficult and challenging thing to do. We can try and talk a lot about SMRs, for example, small modular reactors. The technologies, the startups, the funding is incredible right now in that space, but realistically, and Kyle, hopefully you'll agree with me, nothing is going to happen before 2030. So when you start talking about these new technologies, we have to be realistic about the timing and when they're going to come on board, the impact they're going to have. Because otherwise, there are going to be gaps in our logic, and we're not going to achieve what we're looking to do.
Gary.
So the grid of tomorrow, I think, is not going to be too different than the investment decisions we're seeing today. It does depend locationally, a lot of where you are, kind of that east-west divide. But what we can say is where there are clear and transparent market price signals, we see a lot of renewables and storage. In Texas, you don't see people building combined cycles or combustion turbines because it's perceived to be a stranded asset. It just simply isn't flexible enough to meet what the market price signals are conveying. And I think that's going to continue elsewhere. There is generally a response investors have to market conditions, and they're very nervous about stranded assets. Building a gas plant, when you start seeing negative prices, not a good thing to be running at minimum gen to a negative price. It's a challenging condition when you have a whole bunch of zero cost or negative cost resources entering the supply stack. It's generally lowering prices in the wholesale market. And that impinges upon the economics of traditional generation, but opens up opportunities for storage and renewables as a whole. So we're going to see, certainly in terms of the key dimension, which is flexible capacity, as you noted with the Nicholas paper, but anybody just looking at the market price signals, this is manifest. And that's going to be a big driver. And so how's this going to shift? Well, there's in front of the meter and now behind the meter. That's new, that behind the meter storage pencils, just last couple of years, but it's starting to in a lot of markets. Cost of storage has come down precipitously, and frankly, electric rates, particularly the T&D costs, have increased precipitously. And behind the meter, you don't have to run more than 2-3 hours. So it's that narrow window, and that's going to be transformative. So we're going to see a lot more distributed resources. instead of utility scale. And also consistent with the timing, because we have to move with speed. Behind the meter's certainly a way to do that. And hopefully, we'll continue to have clear and transparent market conditions in the wholesale market.
Phenomenal.
Brian, I had one other thing I wanted to mention.
Of course.
And one of the outcomes from the One Big Beautiful Bill was the impact that it's had, as probably all of you are aware, on wind and solar. And we pulled some stats together that I wanted to share with everyone. There's a significant time pressure now because of what has happened. PPA prices have gone up 4% since the bill was signed, and 60% since 2022. Tax credits, which make up about 30 to 40% of CapEx, obviously are very concerned with these credits going away. And there's a very limited pool of projects that's going to start construction by mid-2026. So when you look at supply demand over the short term, to your question, over the next few years, there's going to be a very significant imbalance. And that's concerning because we have a lot of companies now trying to chase these limited finite projects and get things in place over this next year and a half or so. There's also a concern about projects that are going to be canceled. And $22 billion worth of projects have been canceled in the first half of 2025. And $6.7 billion since June alone. And the renewable installs are now, based on data we've pulled together, 100 gigawatts lower post-bill from 2025 to 2035. So, when you start to look at the supply demand and all the issues we're talking about, and you're looking at the impact on solar or wind over the next year and a half, that's very significant when you're trying to put every single megawatt on the grid. And it needs to be taken into consideration as well.
Maybe just to add one more number to that. So after One Big Beautiful Bill Act, we revised down our wind forecast in MISO by 78 gigawatts between 2025 and 2035. So just to kind of piggyback on that.
Things are moving fast.
Yeah.
And things are slowing down. Thank you all so much. We're going to open it to the audience here, and this entire time I've been wondering who's going to ask Gary first what between the fence means. So we'll see if that comes out. Any questions?
Hi, Andy Ertel from Restoration Climate. Thanks, guys. So offshore wind being canceled, however many gigawatts being canceled in MISO, 5-year waiting list for a gas turbine slot. How much are power prices on the wholesale market, do you think, headed higher?
They're not. Power prices are probably headed lower in the wholesale market. I think it's that 3% window. It's just a very limited period of time where we reach scarcity conditions, and there are caps in these things. So it becomes manifest in the capacity market throughout most of this country, with the exception of Texas, and then it's just that very narrow sliver. All the new resources in Texas, which doesn't have capacity markets, fastest growth market in the US, I'd say, for data centers and load, that's all storage. If you look elsewhere, it's hard to get as much renewable mix east of the Mississippi, as I mentioned. But it's going to be capacity is a binary market, either long or short, and there's really not a lot in between. So you go from very low prices to all of a sudden being short and very high prices. And they call it net cone, but it's basically the levelized cost of building a new gas plant. And that's where the ceiling is. And it's quite high, particularly when you look at $2,500 a kilowatt when it used to be below just $900 a kilowatt. That's a big change in just a couple of years. And the impact of that on capacity prices, which are borne by all ratepayers, is going to be very significant. And we already have a little bit of a ratepayer revolt going on just because of T&D costs. Electricity rates, to most people, their bill is like a tax, and it's very undesirable to see an increase. It's just a burden. They don't know anything. It feels like a tax to them. I think if capacity prices translate through the bills as they're going to over the next 2 to 3 years, that's going to be an issue for the industry, and something that will probably be holds the prospects of re-regulation or something else. I don't think we're going to. We talk a lot of all the above. The economics just aren't there for that at the moment because it's a timing issue. And so it's really going to be what you can get done. We don't really need energy, to your point. It's just capacity.
Is there an effect from the lack of EV demand in terms of battery supply coming on and actually helping deal with the storage solutions that are out there?
So the question is, are EVs going to help with respect to grid flexibility?
And maybe
More lack of demand and the amount of new batteries being
Oh, yeah.
additional supply to the wholesale
Yeah.
market, perhaps, Andy?
Yeah, that's a really good point. So EVs were anticipated to be the largest, and they still are, by far, dwarfing wholesale, still 10%. But yes, there's a lot of surplus, cost of storage, it's supply demand. Demand's diminished, so the cost of supplies come down precipitously. And that makes storage just, look, you can do a 4-hour storage all installed for, half what you could 3 years ago. So it's on the order of, instead of $2,500 a kilowatt, you're looking at like $700 a kilowatt for a 4-hour system. That's very different. And it just makes it very difficult, frankly, for thermal to compete.
Maybe just to play devil's advocate. So in our ERCOT forecast, we think around the clock average wholesale prices are going to rise substantially. And that goes back to the merit order. That goes back to demand rising substantially in a state like Texas. And batteries are going to play an important role there, but batteries can't scale up fast enough to keep up with that demand. Neither can renewables. And so you're going to kind of ride up that merit order. And I think, oh man, I don't have the numbers off the top of my head, but it's, a doubling or tripling of around the clock average prices in a decade or so. So huge increases. I know every power market is different though. So.
Yeah, I would look, I obviously have a significant role here and a difference. So I think a little dynamic of disagreeing would be all right. And I don't see how that's possible when you stick a supply stack with a lot of zero cost resources in it and you keep growing that at a much greater rate than load growth. There's only one way for prices to go, and that's down. And all the data supports that. And you are not going to make up for a lot of intermittent capacity. We already have enough capacity of renewables in Texas to supply the whole system at clean. It's just the wind doesn't blow constantly, and the sun doesn't shine constantly. So we're of the mindset that legacy models lead to that kind of legacy conclusion, thermal's always on the margin. It's rarely on the margin. We get a lot of negative prices. We're seeing a lot more negative prices, and the consistency in number of hours is growing. It's great for storage. They get paid to charge at these negative prices. That's a good thing. And it's a good price signal. It's a clear and transparent market. Probably no other market is let's say, successful as Texas in terms of making the energy transition happen. And they have designed a market that really works to support that.
Yeah, and I think the discussion here too further highlights some level of uncertainty, right?
Yeah.
In varying perspectives.
Yeah.
Even through the 2010s and into the 20s here, you saw, to Gary's point, a large penetration of renewables. So, over a 10-year period, starting, let's say, with 2010, average wholesale power prices, respectfully, right, came down. But what you also saw was a larger penetration of renewables, right? So you have weather-driven uncertainty in terms of how they're going to produce, when they're going to produce, and with that comes volatility in terms of price spikes, which bring the average either up or down. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out, especially as the duck curve starts to show up in interesting areas of the country and perhaps the world that we haven't seen just yet. So, question, Jeff.
Are there any analysis or sort of like opportunities for energy efficiency for like the demand centers? Like, is the demand center built in 3 years just going to be able to do more with less power?
So the efficiency of data centers is definitely improving. Is that kind of what we're getting at?
Basically, yeah. Like, if you take like the expected need for data centers, kind of like extrapolate it out, like you're going to have to bring that line down just as, they get more efficient, basically. I mean, like, thinking about like the forecast where, demand was growing, but then everyone moved to LED light bulbs, like things like that like kind of begin to bring down that demand curve.
Yeah, man. So what I can say is like the PUE for a data center, the efficiency was around 2 in 2014. It's dropped to 1.4 today. It'll further drop to 1.2 on average. I mean, some of the hyperscalers are lower than that, but it'll drop to around 1.2 on average in 2030. So data centers are getting more efficient, but the size of these data centers is growing substantially, right? And so we're now talking about gigawatt-sized data centers and clusters of data centers getting built in states like Ohio, states like Virginia, states like Texas. And so that efficiency is definitely improving, but it's not going to be enough to offset the scale at which we're building these. These AI models, right, that are getting far more complex, they require far more power to train those models, right? And so I think there's kind of just like two competing factors here.
Maybe quantum computing, but that's in the category of kind of SMRs down the road a fair bit. But that would be the game changer in terms of energy input to compute output.
Very good. I think we have time for at least one more question.
Yeah, Christopher Castro. I'm from the National Center for Atmospheric Research in Boulder, Colorado. So just a question, comment for the panel. So we've talked about a lot of the power usage for these AI data centers, but it's not just a function of the power usage, it's also the water demand for the cooling. And it is also the potential pollution to the environment if you're using like a fossil fuel-based technology like natural gas. So I guess a comment question to all of you is, how do you balance those other factors in sort of optimizing your where you generate power and where it goes?
Maybe one non-power related answer to this. I can't speak to water, but all the major data center providers are buying carbon removal credits in substantial quantities to account for this, right? And so Microsoft has purchased just under 20 million, or they've signed agreements for future delivery of 20 million carbon credits from technologies like direct air capture, biochar, reforestation, marine-based carbon sequestration. There's a whole range in their kind of portfolio, and you're seeing other tech companies doing the same thing. And so that's one potential solution that's not directly power related.
Well, I can answer water, which is they're all closed loop systems these days. They don't consume water. And I think you're right, Kyle, the Greenleaf and Google's browser is still going to exist, and they're going to find other ways to address their Scope 2 emissions. They have to meet the timing issue now. It's an arms race for more power as soon as possible. That takes precedent, and so they'll find alternatives to reduce emissions.
Water is interesting because, going back to the other question, when you start thinking about larger data centers and energy efficiency, water has a lot of weight, right? And when we're talking with architects and folks building these data centers, the dynamics are changing. So to gain energy efficiency, you have to come up with better technology to replace the water. If you don't do that, then things could actually get worse. So as these data centers are getting bigger and more complex, the number of variables that need to change to get the efficiencies you're looking for are also having to be adjusted.
Yeah, very good. I'm getting the look from Jess, so we are going to wrap this up, but please join me in thanking our panelists. Great session, and enjoy the rest of the Climate Summit.
Ask more questions. They're going to be around for a few extra minutes.